it's been a while. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Thorn Blackbird. I know it's been a minute. Look, I moved to an entirely new country, okay? Today, for Pride Month, we will be diving into the history of lesbianism in ancient Egypt. Women loving women. Get ready for some messy L-word type drama. Now, the thing is, it's really hard to study ancient people when it comes to being lesbian or gay or queer, bi, whatever, because they did not use those terms. Those are modern terms. No, they didn't have woola woola or even like a sad little rainbow cartouche carved into a wall. But just because they didn't have our words doesn't mean lesbians and gay people in the ancient period did not exist. We're just working with a different cultural framework and a different vocabulary. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, most of the surviving sources we have today about ancient homosexuality are about men. Men writing about men, a tale as old as time. Ew! That's largely due to survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is the idea that sources only survive because someone felt it important enough to keep track of and to keep record of. That means we're left with a skewed historical record, and in this case, one that mainly highlights male experience, especially when it comes to sexuality. Women's sexuality has long been erased in history. I mean, it still is today. But that doesn't mean women's love stories did not exist. It just means we have to dig a little bit deeper. Also, peep the fit. Do you guys like the makeup today? I decided to do the ooge at the eye and wear my linen for the video. Before we dive into lesbian love spells and sapphic dream drama, let's analyze male-on-male love in ancient Egypt because that's where the receipts are. There's a lot of them too. For example, there's a case of two royal men buried together, face to face, nose to nose. A pose typically reserved for spouses. Regardless of this, scholars have debated their relationship endlessly, of course, because when can scholars ever agree on anything? Were they lovers, brothers, conjoined twins? No, seriously, there was a scholar who wrote a paper suggesting that they were twins. And they were two mates! Now, speaking as an identical twin myself, I can confidently say I would be caught neither dead nor alive kissing my sister. But hey, maybe these historians have a different idea of what it means to have a brotherly love. I feel like these historians may have watched too much Ouran High School Host Club.
Oh, so you're gonna deny it, huh?
It is also worth noting that homosexuality was not criminalized or punished in ancient Egypt. However, adultery was, and that will be important later. All right, back to the lesbians. That's why you're here anyways, right? The oldest known record on woola woola, or woman-on-woman love, in ancient Egypt comes from a late period dream manual or a treatise on how to interpret dreams. These texts were incredibly common across the ancient world, used to interpret omens from dreams or predicting someone's future, much like the Oneirokritikon in ancient Greece. In this particular text, Papyrus Carlsberg 13, there is an ominous warning. If a man dreams of his wife laying with another woman, bad things are near, and ending is near. Probably the end of his marriage. But here's the important question. Was lesbianism being condemned? Was it seen as something blasphemous or even criminal? Well, now, brilliant Egyptologist, I might butcher this name, Kasia Spaskowska? Hope I got that right. She explains that it's not queerness being published, it's infidelity. The warning in the dream is about betrayal, not orientation. If you're a man dreaming that your woman is sleeping with someone else, whether that be another woman or a man, congrats, you're dreaming about the end of your marriage. So of course it would bring about bad endings. This warning against infidelity or adultery is very reminiscent of the warnings found in the Book of the Dead. And no, not the Necronomicon, we're talking real books on the dead, not some badly written fiction. H.P. Lovecraft fucking sucks. Who said that? Huh? So you've probably heard of the Book of the Dead at some point in your life.
Maybe the Book of the Dead.
The Book of the Dead? Are you sure you want to be playing around with this thing?
This is a real ancient Egyptian religious text, and it incorporates what we call the 42 ideals or the 42 laws of Ma'at, the 42 negative confessions, rules and laws to live a good life by. Line 27 of these says, I have not lain with a man. But guess what comes right before that? I have not committed adultery. And now this is where the adultery part comes in important again. Once again, this warning is more about cheating than it is about any sexual orientation. Fun fact, or not so fun fact, devastating fact, the Bible, when it mentions thou shalt not lay with another man, was originally talking about the practice of pedastry, or laying with children, not homosexuality. You can guess why it was changed with all the issues that they have with their priests. Ancient Egyptians didn't have the same intense focus we have on personal identity today. They didn't have words for like gay, lesbian, bi, straight. What mattered to them was ma'at, or cosmic balance and order. They didn't care about who you slept with as long as you weren't cheating on your wife. And now for my favorite part, magical girl-on-girl obsession. We're diving headfirst into ancient Egyptian lesbian spells. We're talking yandere level devotion here. They were summoning spirits of the underworld, daimons, to go after the girls that they wanted. Welcome to the Ptolemaic, or the Greek and Roman periods of Egypt. The later Ptolemaic period and the Roman period of Egypt are where we get most of these spells from. This is the era where women wrote love spells so absolutely unhinged, it would make a modern AO3 Your Name fanfic author fucking blush. Take this spell, for example, written in Greek and inscribed on lead on Edificaciones in the 3rd or 4th century CE. By means of this corpse daimon, inflame the heart, deliver the spirit of Gorgonia, whom Nilogenia bore, with love and affection for Sophia, whom Isara bore. Constrain Gorgonia, whom Nilogenia bore, to cast herself into this bathhouse for the sake of Sophia, whom Isara bore. Burn, set on fire, inflame her soul, heart, liver, spirit with love for Sophia, whom Isara bore. Drive Gorgonia, whom Nilogenia bore, drive her, torment her body night and day, force her to rush forth from every place and every house, loving Sophia, whom Isara bore. She surrendered like a slave, giving herself and all her possessions to her, because this is the will and command of the great God. Girl, same. Low-key shipping Gorgonia and Sophia. It is interesting to note how bathhouses today still have a reputation as a place for certain meetups with LGBT folks, mainly gay men these days, when it's been happening for thousands of years.
Two bros chilling in the hot tub, 5 feet apart cause they're not gay.
I've already done that. Yeah, I know. And it worked.
The level of a devotion is very intense here. Like, sure, I've texted someone what you doing at 3 a.m. before, but I've never commanded the governors of the earth and beings of the underworld to bring me my lover. That is commitment. Where's that kind of level of commitment on Timey? All they do on there is beat around the bush. Okay, so here's another spell, a little shorter, but still as emotionally intense. I adjure you, you Angelos, by Anubis and Hermes and all the rest down below, attract and bind Serapius, whom Helen bore, to this Charias. Now, quickly, by her soul and heart attract Serapius, herself whom Helen bore from her own womb. Certainly lesbian yearning transcends time, unfortunately. Always about the yearning and the pining, never about being together. These types of spells were known as agoigai spells, or fetching charms in ancient Greece, quite literally to fetch a lover to you. Traditionally speaking, we usually only see these spells cast by men on women, very rarely women on women. In fact, the only place that we seem to find these women on women agoigai spells is, in fact, Egypt. This suggests to us that in Egypt, it may have been more widespread, or at least more common, for women to openly express their desire and act on it. But what makes these spells even more remarkable is who cast them. It wasn't nobility, it wasn't queens or pharaohs. It was commoners, it was the poor. And honestly, that's probably why these spells survived. If a noblewoman, a queen, one of their daughters had done the same, the records likely would have been erased, and her name likely cursed for offending later religious sensibilities. Because in the centuries that followed, as Christianity rose to power and temples fell, anything deemed heretical or pagan was systematically destroyed, and that include queer texts and queer stories, queer voices. Scrolls were burned, shrines were destroyed, and identities were lost. An unfortunate example of this queer erasure during this time period can be found with a dramatic lesbian love story. Now, buckle up, because this is where it actually gets crazy. Like Sapphic queen falsely accused pining in exile type of crazy.
Interesting.
So let's talk about a lost novel from the 2nd century CE that somehow, despite its missing chapters and centuries of academic squeamishness trying to bury it, still remains to us today. It gave us one of the most intense, emotionally loaded lesbian love stories in all of ancient history. The book is called the Babylionica. Babylionica. This book was written by the Syrian author Iamblichus, one of my favorite authors, who also wrote De Mysteries or On the Mysteries. And let me tell you, this book is unhinged in the best possible way. Imagine mistaken identities, evil kings, lesbian yearning. This story had a lot in it, like a lot. But what we're focusing on today is the love story between the Egyptian queen Berenike and her lover Mesopotamia. But let's rewind a bit. In the story, Berenike and Mesopotamia are introduced only briefly. You'd be forgiven for missing it entirely. They are treated as footnotes by the later Christian medieval writer that rewrote the story, which is the only reason we still have it today, is because this guy decided to write it down from memory. Photius, this medieval scholar, if you want to call him a scholar, summarized the novel centuries later, with censorship rivaling that of the US government.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
According to him, Berenike's actions towards Mesopotamia were immoral, her actions disgraceful, and her love story, he calls it wild, unlawful eros. You know, this is like a priest being caught reading a smut fic, being surprised by what's inside, but still continuing to read it anyways. Now, regardless of this guy's translations, when we actually look at the Greek phrasing in the text, we get some interesting clues. Photius says Berenike engaged in agrian autes and ekthesimon eroton. That's not just immoral. That's fierce, savage, and unlawful love. And remember, this story was not a villain arc. Berenike was not portrayed as some evil, terrible person in the story. She was portrayed as someone deeply in love. Passionately, fiercely, erotically. The word eros is right there in the description. Erotic. It was unapologetically sexual. Not just some deep friendship-coded nonsense between two women. It was eros. Passion. Physical pleasure. Their relationship was so passionately charged, it drove the plot across continents. After being separated by a series of wild misadventures, including poison honey, fake deaths, mistaken identities, and enough prison breaks to rival Orange is the New Black, Mesopotamia is finally sent back to Berenike. All because the executioner thought she was too pretty to kill. And so he sends her off back to the woman from whom she had been taken. Now, scholars have debated, I know, when will they stop ever debating? That whether the word gamos, used in this context, means married. And look, I get it. Ancient Greek can be tricky to translate, especially in contexts like these. But I feel like these academics, are being intentionally obtuse, considering the context. The word gamos is used elsewhere in the story to refer to heterosexual marriages, so why not Berenike and Mesopotamia? Is it because they're women? It's because they're women. Why is sexuality and love only ambiguous when it's between two women or two men? Why is it only ever straightforward with straight people? And historians will call them besties, just gals being pals. Now, some scholars do admit that this ambiguity might come more from them than the text itself, which is a good step forward. Real anthropologists and archaeologists today do try to separate ourselves from our internal biases when we try to study other cultures and history, because otherwise we miss key and important factors like this. Because let's be real, if you think marriage between two women is strange or absurd or just completely impossible, that's your own personal issue. So then why did Photius write Berenike as this fiercely savage and unlawful woman when her desires for Mesopotamia were socially acceptable at the time? Well, the Babylionica, again, was written during the 2nd century CE during the rise of Christianity. I know, it always goes back to the scene of the crime. It was a time when Egypt was under Roman rule, and Christianity was inching towards cultural dominance. Temples were slowly dying out, the old religions being banned and outlawed. And when that happens, you get men like Clement of Alexandria. We got some boos in the chat. A church father who made it his personal mission to condemn women who he claimed behaved like men, who dared to marry other women. According to Clement, it was a perversion of nature. I see the church has not changed much in the past couple thousand years. So what do you do when you're a man like Photius and you're writing centuries later and trying to protect the good, moral, standing citizens of Byzantium while you summarize the Babylionica and quietly erase Berenike's story? You call it immoral, savage, puerile fiction. You notice the church tends to call a lot of things that they don't agree with savage. Indigenous people. You call it immoral, savage, puerile fiction. You scoff at the indecencies while clutching your pearls, all while erasing the sapphic, the lesbian love. And that's exactly what Phaetius did. But regardless of any ancient censorship, the love story still survived. Not all of it, not the full tale, but just enough of it, just enough lines, just enough scraps of Greek grammar to tell us that this wasn't a joke, this wasn't subtext, this wasn't some gay subplot. This was a full-blown lesbian romance buried under centuries of academic and religious shame. And that makes it one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking examples of queer erasure in history. Because even though Berenike and Mesopotamia are fictional, their love reflects what actual ancient love looked like in antiquity. So no, this wasn't just some unimportant gay subplot. This was a story important enough and impactful enough that someone tried to bury it, to destroy it. And the fact that we still have it, even parts of it today, now that's the kind of magic even a sorcerer couldn't cast. So it's hot as fuck, but let's talk about a frustrating example with one of the lesbian love spells now. And another example of academic erasure of queer people, specifically women, of course. One of these ancient love spells was retranslated in the year 1910 by the scholar Franz Boll. Franz Boll? Franz Boll. Now, the original spell used feminine pronouns for both parties. It was clearly describing a woman casting a love spell on another woman. But Boll, of course, assumed this had to be a mistake. A woman couldn't love another woman, right? The scribe surely must have mistranslated or written something down wrong. What did Franz do? He corrected it, of course. He rewrote the spell to be heterosexual, which he felt was more appropriate. And it wasn't until 1989 that the original translation was fixed and the pronouns were both changed back to feminine. But even then, many sources still use the heterosexualized version. This is far from an isolated case. Academia has long struggled with erasure of both women and queer people, where scholars, instead of studying what is right in front of them, project their own worldview and their own nonsense onto the evidence. They hold the artifact in their hands, the text is right there, and still yet they can't believe it. They only want to see what they expect to see, and that is a problem. Okay, well, enough with written sources, let's take a look at some visuals. Now, there's a highly debated statue of two women who were supposedly married in Egypt, Edith and Ryu. They're seated in the classic married couples pose, bodies pressed together, arms intertwined, very intimate. Yeah, scholars have described them as just gals being pals. I would like to disagree with certain scholars on this one though. If they were in fact just friends, why do we not see more examples of just friends in the classic married couples pose? We would see more examples, no? Why mirror the traditional depictions of marriage instead of choosing another way to depict their friendship, if that's what it was, just friendship? Here's the thing, ambiguity is a reoccurring theme in Egyptian records, but the ambiguity mainly comes from us, not from them. The Egyptians knew who they were. When modern scholars take a look at these things, mainly white, cis, heterosexual men, they bring all those preconceived biases with them. And instead of asking what the ancient Egyptians meant, they only ask what they expect to see. So yeah, maybe Ida and Ryu were just good friends. Or maybe, just maybe, they were two women in love and we've spent hundreds of years refusing to call it what it is. Lesbians! But that's just a theory. A game theory. Let's take a detour from Egyptian sources and focus on what other ancient sources were saying about Egypt at the time, specifically in Talmudic literature, so Jewish literature. Now, fair warning, this is less peer-reviewed academic info and more of an ancient side-eye. In the Talmud, the Egyptians were known for what the Jewish people politely, passive-aggressively, called a sexual liberal lifestyle. And by liberal, they did not mean queer Tumblr discourse. They meant they were going at it. Basically, in the eyes of some ancient rabbis, Egypt was the Vegas of the Mediterranean, but with more eyeliner and fewer slot machines. Rashi, an 11th century scholar, described Egyptian women as having held multiple husbands. Polyamory. And the scholar Maimonides specifically referred to lesbianism as the acts of Egypt. And this wasn't just a poetic flourish, this was a reputation. Egypt was that girl. on girl. In fact, while male-on-male love was typically associated with Sodom and Gomorrah in Talmudic literature, wulla wulla, or lesbian love, was typically associated with Egypt. Polyandry, sapphics, that's Egypt, baby. So while these historic texts weren't exactly supportive, they are significant. They show us that even from an outsider's perspective, Egypt was seen as a place where gender and sexual boundaries were more fluid, where women had the audacity to love other women and maybe collect a few husbands on the side like Pokemon. Now, we can't just skip over the centuries after the end of antiquity in Egypt. So the period where the ancient period had ended before the medieval period had begun. Why? Because even after ancient Egypt had technically ended, the social and relationship dynamics still tell us a lot about how ancient people felt culturally and socially. So let's rewind to the 5th century. Located at the White Monastery in Upper Egypt, things got a little sapphic. I mean, you know nuns, right?
Oh my God!
The White Monastery in Upper Egypt, a letter from Shinote, the famous monastic reformer, chastises 2 women for chasing after one another. Or more specifically, for running after one another in physical desire. That really can't be taken any other way, I think. Their names? Taise and Tasanso. Now, this was not an isolated case. This was a common enough problem that monks were writing official complaints that these nuns were too loud. The point is, gender and sexuality in ancient Egypt wasn't rigid or placed into binaries and boxes. Queer identities in ancient Egypt may have been overlooked or overwritten, but they existed. It existed in magic, in poems, in actions, in stories, in arts. And despite current academic discourse, it cannot be erased. So, was lesbianism accepted in ancient Egypt? Well, sort of. It wasn't criminalized, it wasn't punished, and oftentimes it was erased. Even today, there is still ongoing debate whether we should use terms like lesbian, gay, bi, queer in studying these ancient civilizations, these ancient people. But regardless of terminology, of vocabulary, the fact still remains: women who loved women existed, and men who loved men existed. Whether historians want to acknowledge that fact or continue to debate it into oblivion doesn't change reality. As we move further into the 21st century, scholars are going back and re-examining the evidence. They're asking better questions and they're recognizing the biases of their predecessors. And they're choosing to see what is actually there, not just what they expect to see. So guys, I also want to announce that my merch line is up. Now we do have some Hecate themed art, tapestries, bikinis. I myself want the bikini so bad. We have Snegs or Nebuchadnezzar from the Book of the Dead, my personal favorite. And if you guys would like to go get some, 100% of the profits are going to my cousin. Go check it out. I myself am buying a lot from the line, and this is only a pre-release. There's so many more designs coming, you guys have no idea. And if you're interested in this and more, I do have a Patreon. You can join for as low as $1 a month if you would like exclusive access to an entire library, a Discord server, as well as early YouTube content. And I do teach about ancient history, the history of religion, magic, all of that on there as well. Go check it out. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and resurrect that subscribe button like it's Osiris. And feel free to comment your favorite ancient gay couple or quote. Yes, Sappho is acceptable. All right, bye! I hope this is like set up similarly. I'll film this after. Now let me get the fuck out of this because I am sweating my fucking balls off.